The email sat in my inbox for 3 days before I opened it. Subject line: Property Management Opportunity, Competitive Compensation. I almost deleted it as spam until I noticed the sender, William Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Holdings. I'd been between jobs for nearly 4 months. Wyoming winters weren't kind to unemployed wilderness guides, and my savings had dropped to uncomfortable levels. I clicked on the email, expecting nothing but prepared to consider almost anything. "Mr. Mitchell," it began, "your experience in backcountry management and self-sufficiency has been brought to my attention. I own a substantial property in northwestern Montana requiring on-site maintenance and security. The position offers considerable compensation for a 6-month commitment beginning immediately." The salary figure listed made me blink twice. It was more than I'd make in 2 years of regular work. The email continued with unusual specifics. "The property is remote, requiring complete self-sufficiency. Outside contact will be limited to weekly email reports to my office. You must arrive alone and remain on the property for the duration of your contract. Hunting is permitted within property boundaries to supplement provided supplies." I replied with my resume attached, half expecting never to hear back. Within hours, William's response arrived with a detailed contract and property specifications. The place was huge. Nearly 500 acres of private land right next to national forest near Glacier National Park. The house was in the middle of nowhere, but still had all the modern stuff: generator power, satellite internet, email only, and a well-stocked pantry. The contract terms were specific and weird: 6 months without leaving the property, no visitors, weekly reports required, equipment maintenance schedules, boundaries to patrol. It felt like a mix of house-sitting and security work with an emphasis on keeping everything private. I printed the contract, reading it twice with a beer in hand. Nothing clearly illegal jumped out, though the confidentiality sections were really detailed. The payment schedule caught my eye. Half the total wired immediately upon signing, the remainder upon completion. Even if I walked away halfway through, I'd still be better off financially than I'd been in years. I called my sister Beth before making my decision. She's the practical one in the family. "It sounds too good to be true," she said when I explained the offer, carefully avoiding specifics as the contract required. "Maybe," I admitted, "but the company is legitimate. I checked them out. Real estate holdings all over the Midwest, commercial properties in Chicago, resort developments in Michigan. And they want you to live alone in the woods for 6 months. What are you guarding, Tom? Nuclear secrets?" I laughed. "Just some rich guy's vacation home, I think. The property taxes alone must be insane." "Send me the exact location before you go," she insisted, "and call me when you can." "I'll email you," I promised, not mentioning the limited communication stipulation. That night, I signed the contract and sent it back to William's office in Chicago. Within 20 minutes, my phone buzzed with a banking alert. The first payment had already shown up. The money sitting in my account put my worries to rest. The next morning, I started packing my truck. I took my time, being careful about what I'd need for 6 months alone. My hunting rifle and shotgun, fishing gear, extra ammo, tools for any repairs I might have to fix myself, winter clothes, boots, and enough canned food to add to whatever was already there. Books, since there wouldn't be any Netflix on the crappy satellite internet. A good first aid kit and meds. I couldn't just run to CVS where I was going. The drive north from Wyoming took me through places I knew that started to look different as I crossed into Montana. The mountains got bigger, the trees more packed together. I'd lived in the wilderness most of my adult life, but I had this weird feeling about this trip, like I'd been on this exact road before. "That's weird," I said aloud to myself as I recognized a particular mountain silhouette I couldn't possibly have seen before. The feeling faded as quickly as it had come, and I chalked it up to excitement about the new job. The GPS coordinates led me toward the western edge of Glacier National Park, down increasingly narrow and remote roads. Cell service disappeared about an hour after I passed through Missoula. By late afternoon, I reached Kalispell, the last significant town before my destination. I pulled into a large outfitter's store, deciding to make one final supply run. Inside, I grabbed extra ammunition, more batteries, additional non-perishable food, and heavy-duty winter gear. Montana winters were notorious, especially in the mountains. The older man at the register made small talk as he rang up my purchases. "Quite the haul," he commented, looking over my selections. "You headed up for hunting season?" "Not exactly," I said, taking a job managing a property up near Hungry Horse. His hands slowed on the register. "The Blackwell place?" I looked up from my wallet, surprised. "Yeah, actually. You know it?" The man's expression changed, something passing across his face that I couldn't quite read. He finished ringing up my items without meeting my eyes. "Been through a lot of caretakers, that property," he said finally, handing me my receipt. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. He shrugged, already turning to the next customer. "Just saying. People don't tend to stay long." I loaded the supplies into my already packed truck, ignoring what he said. Every small town had its gossip and stories. I checked my directions one last time and pulled back onto the road, driving toward the mountains as the afternoon went on. The roads got narrower and more twisted as I drove deeper into the Montana wilderness. My truck struggled on some of the steeper inclines, the engine making noise as I navigated hairpin turns that seemed to double back on themselves. Thick pine forests crowded the edges of the gravel road, branches occasionally scraping against my windows when the path narrowed. After nearly 3 hours of driving from Kalispell, I rounded a final bend and saw it, the Blackwell property. The house stood with dense forest and jagged mountain slopes behind it, larger than I'd expected. It was built in a rustic mountain style, with large timber beams and a wide covered porch. But there was something commanding about it. Even though it was in this remote corner near Hungry Horse, the place looked surprisingly well kept. I pulled up to the front and cut the engine. The sudden silence hit me first. A quiet broken only by the ticking of my cooling engine and distant bird calls. I grabbed my bag and the keys William had sent via courier to my Wyoming address before stepping out. The air felt different here, cooler, with a pine smell that was nice to breathe in. I took a moment to look around, seeing the neat gravel driveway, the trimmed path leading to the front door, the carefully stacked firewood along the side of the house. For a place supposedly needing a caretaker, it seemed already well taken care of. The front door unlocked with a solid click. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my boots making sounds on polished hardwood floors. The difference between outside and inside caught me off guard. While the outside was all rustic mountain charm, the interior was surprisingly modern and upscale. The main room had high ceilings with exposed beams, but they framed recessed lighting and modern fixtures. A large leather sectional sat across from a stone fireplace, with built-in bookshelves full of hardcovers on both sides. The kitchen opened to the main living area, with granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and what looked like professional-grade cooking equipment. "Not exactly roughing it," I muttered to myself as I set my bag down. I walked around the first floor, seeing more fancy stuff, a wine fridge, a nice TV setup, though I remembered the contract said there was no satellite TV, and artwork that looked really expensive to me. In the kitchen, a thick binder was sitting on the center island with "Property Management" printed on its spine. Next to it was a sealed envelope with my name written in nice handwriting. I opened the envelope first, finding a short typed note. "Mr. Mitchell, welcome to the property. Everything you need to know is in the manual. Remember our agreement. Complete isolation, weekly reports, property boundaries maintained. The pantry and freezer are fully stocked. Hunting zones are marked on the provided maps. Your first report is due in 7 days. William Blackwell." The shortness of the note matched the all-business tone of our email exchanges. I put it aside and opened the binder. Inside was a well-organized manual. Daily maintenance schedules, seasonal tasks, emergency plans, maps of the property with boundaries marked in bold red lines, and detailed info about the house systems. The property was even larger than I'd realized, Nearly 500 acres of private land backed up against national forest. The maps showed several outbuildings, a lake to the north, and hunting zones marked in green. Red lines showed where the property ended, with specific notes about keeping up fences and boundary markers. After looking through the manual, I decided to unload my truck and check the utilities before it got dark. The generator was kept in a small outbuilding about 50 yards from the main house, a fancy model with automatic switching and enough power for the entire property. The fuel tanks were nearly full, and according to the maintenance log hanging nearby, had been fixed up just 2 weeks earlier. The water came from a well system with thorough filtration. Again, everything looked recently taken care of, with new filters and chemicals neatly lined up on shelves. I checked the satellite internet equipment set up on the roof, making sure the signal strength showed it was working. Back inside, I tried my cell phone. No service, as expected. I turned on the computer in the small office off the main living area. The system connected to the internet. But when I tried opening a browser, I got a message about limited connectivity. I could access email and nothing else, exactly as William had told me. I sent a quick email to my sister. Beth, made it to the property. It's more fancy than I expected. No cell service as predicted, and internet is email only, so this will be my only form of communication. Don't worry if you don't hear from me for a while. Everything's good here. Love you, Tom. I spent the next hour unpacking and organizing my supplies. The pantry and refrigerator were indeed well stocked, with enough food to last months. Canned goods, freezer-packed meats, dry staples, even wine and spirits. I added my own supplies to the mix, arranging my gear in what appeared to be a mudroom off the kitchen. As evening approached, I made a simple dinner and took it to the back deck overlooking the forest. The property sloped gently from the house before disappearing into thick trees. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks catching the last golden light of day. It was peaceful, beautiful even. That's when I noticed something odd. The forest, which had been filled with bird calls and the rustle of small animals, suddenly went quiet. The silence spread like a wave across the woods, moving from east to west. In the distance, a group of deer burst from the tree line, running full tilt across an open area before disappearing into the forest again. I stood up, peering into the darkening woods, trying to spot what might have spooked them. Nothing moved. No predators emerged. After several minutes of watching, I went back to my meal. But the silence lingered, unnatural and heavy. By the time I finished eating, darkness had fallen completely, and the forest had become an impenetrable wall of black beyond the reach of the deck lights. I went inside, securing the door behind me. I spent the evening going through the house more thoroughly, checking closets, examining the basement, which contained a workshop area and wine cellar, and reading more of the detailed manual. I couldn't shake a feeling of being watched, catching myself glancing repeatedly at the large windows that faced the woods. When I finally went to bed in the master bedroom upstairs, exhaustion from the long drive should have knocked me out immediately. Instead, I found myself staring at the ceiling, listening to the strange new sounds of the house. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of timber, the soft whir of the heating system. Just as I was drifting off, a sound cut through the night. Something between a howl and a human scream, distant but clear enough to snap me fully awake. I sat up, heart pounding, trying to identify what animal could make such a noise. In my years as a wilderness guide, I'd heard wolves, cougars, even the strange calls of elk during rut. But this was different. Higher pitched, almost agonized. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by silence. I got up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. The property's exterior lights illuminated the immediate grounds, but beyond that was absolute darkness. I saw nothing moving, no glint of eyes in the woods. Sleep now seemed impossible. I retrieved my hunting rifle from the gun case I'd brought, checked that it was loaded, and placed it by the bed. Then I methodically checked every door and window in the house, confirming they were locked. The property manual had mentioned local wildlife, bears, mountain lions, wolves, but had given no special warnings beyond standard wilderness precautions. I eventually dozed off sometime after 3 a.m., my sleep restless and filled with half-formed dreams of running through endless woods. Morning light filtered through the bedroom windows, pulling me from uneasy sleep. The events of the night seemed less threatening in daylight. I made coffee and took it outside to walk the immediate grounds. That's when I saw them. Tracks in the soft mud near the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the house. I walked over, coffee forgotten in my hand as I crouched to examine them. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen, too large for any normal woodland animal, each print nearly 15 inches long. The shape was the most disturbing part. They had an almost human-like arrangement, but with elongated toes that ended in what looked like claw marks gouged deep into the earth. The stride length between prints was massive, suggesting something that moved with incredible speed. I walked along the tracks, following them to where they disappeared into the forest. They came from the north, circled the house at a distance, and then returned in the same direction. Whatever had made them had been watching the house. I stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the trees, wondering what kind of animal had visited during the night. Despite years of backcountry experience, I had no explanation for tracks like these. I thought about emailing William to ask, but something stopped me, a reluctance to appear incompetent or easily spooked on my first day. Instead, I returned to the house, grabbed my camera, and went back to photograph the tracks before they disappeared. Documentation seemed like the rational response. I could include it in my first weekly report if the tracks appeared again. The rest of the day passed in practical tasks, organizing supplies, familiarizing myself with the generator maintenance procedures, walking some of the nearby property boundaries marked with red blazes on trees. I kept my rifle with me, slung over my shoulder, and found myself repeatedly scanning the forest edge, looking for movement. That night, I closed all the curtains before dark and kept a fire going in the large stone fireplace. The strange sounds didn't return, but as I sat reading one of the books from the shelf, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out in those woods was waiting, watching. My first day at the Blackwell property had left me with more questions than answers. I woke up early the next morning, my mind still stuck on those strange tracks. After a quick breakfast, I decided to check what the house had and what I still needed. The pantry was pretty well stocked, but I noticed a few practical items missing. Extra batteries for my flashlights, a better first aid kit than I'd brought, and some tools for taking care of the property's exterior. Going into town sounded good too. I felt nervous about spending another full day alone on the property after what I'd seen. Getting out for a few hours seemed smart. I found a local map in the office drawer that showed Coram as the nearest small town, about 20 miles from the property. I tucked my wallet into my back pocket, grabbed my keys, and headed out to my truck. The morning air was fresh and cool, the forest quiet but normal. Birds called from the trees, and I spotted a chipmunk running across the gravel driveway. The drive to town took me down the same winding roads I'd traveled to reach the property. In daylight, the route seemed less scary, the forest less gloomy. Still, I kept thinking about those tracks, so large and nothing like anything I'd seen before. Coram wasn't much more than a wide spot in the road, a small cluster of buildings surrounded by scattered houses. I spotted a general store with gas pumps out front, a post office, and what looked like a diner at the far end of the main street. A few pickup trucks and older cars sat parked along the roadside. I pulled into the general store parking lot and cut the engine. The building was a 2-story wooden structure with Sullivan's General Store painted in faded red letters across the front. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door, stepping into a shop that smelled of coffee, wood, and various household goods. A woman behind the counter looked up as I entered. She had auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail. When she saw me, she smiled like she knew me. "Thomas Mitchell, back already?" she called out cheerfully. I thought you usually came in on Thursdays." I stopped in my tracks, surprised. I had never been to this store before, and certainly hadn't told anyone my name. "I'm sorry, have we met?" I asked, approaching the counter. The woman's smile hesitated a little. "Very funny, Tom. You've been coming in every week for, well, it must be years now." She looked at my face with growing concern. "Are you feeling okay?" "I just arrived at the Blackwell property yesterday," I said carefully. "This is my first time in Karam." A few other customers in the store looked over at our conversation. An older man checking out fishing lures nodded at me. "Mitchell," he acknowledged. "Good to see you. Got any luck with those night fishing spots I told you about last month?" I felt a chill. I'd never seen this man before in my life. The woman behind the counter must be Emma Sullivan, going by the store name. She gave a little laugh that didn't seem real. "Tom, you're being weird. You've been the caretaker up at the Blackwell place for ages. You always buy the same things. Coffee, those specific batteries for your weather station, and beef jerky." Another customer, a middle-aged woman by the canned goods, nodded. "You helped my son when his car broke down last winter, Mr. Mitchell. Don't you remember?" I felt lightheaded, like the floor beneath me had suddenly tilted. These people were absolutely convinced they knew me. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just took this job. I signed the contract with William Blackwell last week." Emma's face changed a bit. She looked worried or scared for a second. She looked at a wall calendar behind the counter. "Well," she said with forced brightness, "memory can play tricks on all of us. What can I help you with today?" I wanted to press the issue, but the other customers had gone back to their shopping, though I caught them looking at me. I didn't want to make a scene, so I quickly grabbed the supplies I needed: batteries, tools, a better first aid kit, and some other necessities. When I brought everything to the counter, Emma rang me up quickly, her earlier friendliness replaced with a cold politeness. "That'll be $43.27, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I handed her my credit card. As she processed the payment, she leaned forward slightly and lowered her voice. "Be careful up there, Tom. The full moon's coming in a couple weeks." Before I could ask what she meant, she straightened up and handed me my receipt with a professional smile. "Have a good day now." I grabbed my bags and headed for the door, my thoughts all over the place. When I stepped outside, an old guy who'd been leaning against the store wall came up to me. He had on a worn-out trucker hat and a thick white mustache that stood out against his tan, wrinkled face. "Mitchell," he said gruffly. "Got a minute?" I hesitated, then nodded cautiously. "Robert Thompson," he said, not offering his hand. "You know who I am?" "No, sir, I don't," I replied honestly. He looked at me closely. "How's the situation up at the Blackwell place?" "What situation?" I asked. Robert took a step back, looking confused. "You really don't remember, do you?" He shook his head. "Sorry to bother you. Must have been mistaken." He turned and walked away before I could ask him anything else, leaving me standing there with my bags of supplies and a sick feeling in my stomach. I decided to stop at the diner before going back home. Maybe some food would help clear my head. The small restaurant was at the end of the main street, one of those roadside diners with chrome and big windows. Inside, the place was about half full. A few truckers were at the counter, while families and couples sat in some of the booths. I picked an empty booth near the back and sat down, putting my shopping bags next to me. A young blonde waitress came over with a pot of coffee and a mug, which she put in front of me without asking. "Hey, Tom," she said with an easy smile. "The usual today?" I stared at her name tag, Judy, trying to place her face and coming up empty. "What would my usual be?" I asked carefully. She laughed. "Very funny. Denver omelet, hash browns extra crispy, sourdough toast. Same as every Thursday for the past 5 years." Her smile dropped when she saw my expression. "Tom, you okay?" "I've never been here before," I said, my voice coming out harder than I intended. Judy took a small step back, her green eyes looking confused. But you come in every Thursday morning. You always sit in this booth. You like your coffee black. You read the paper while you eat. And you always leave a $5 tip no matter what you order. I grabbed the edge of the table. What's today's date? Judy pointed to a small calendar taped beside the register. October 17th. I pulled out my phone and checked the date. October 17th. But that couldn't be right. I'd arrived at the property on October 5th. That was yesterday, wasn't it? I need to go, I said abruptly, standing up so quickly I knocked against the table, spilling some of the coffee. Tom, are you sick? Do you need... I'm fine. I just need to go. I left some money on the table, grabbed my bags, and hurried out. In my truck, I sat holding the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what was happening. I checked my phone again. October 17th. I scrolled through my call history and found my last call to my sister Beth on October 4th, the day before I arrived at the property. Had I lost almost 2 weeks of time? How was that possible? And how did these people know me when I'd never met them before? The drive back to the Blackwell property was a blur. My mind kept cycling through possibilities, each more worrying than the last. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe there was another Thomas Mitchell who had been here before me. Maybe something about the property was affecting my memory. When I pulled up to the house, everything looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. I brought my supplies inside and immediately went to the computer in the office. I checked my sent emails and found weekly reports to William Blackwell that I had no memory of writing. The first dated October 8th, the second October 15th. Both contained detailed accounts of maintenance I'd performed, wildlife I'd seen, and weather conditions. I scrolled through the emails, reading my own words that I couldn't remember writing, describing activities I couldn't remember doing. According to these reports, I'd fixed a section of the roof, cleared brush from the property boundaries, and tracked what I believed was a large elk through the north woods. I sat back in the chair, feeling a rush of panic. How could I lose days, nearly 2 weeks, without any memory of them? What had I been doing during that time? I went to my bedroom and dug through my bag until I found a small notebook and pen. If I was losing time, I needed to document everything. I wrote the date at the top of the first page, October 17th, and began recording everything that had happened since I arrived at the property, as best I could remember it. Then I detailed the strange encounters in town, the people who claimed to know me, the missing days. When I finished writing, I looked back through the pages, reading my own account as if it might reveal something I'd missed. Then I made a decision. I would document everything from now on, every day, every task, every strange occurrence. If time was slipping away from me, at least I'd have a record. I tore out a blank page from the notebook and wrote in large letters, "Check the date, every morning and night. Write in this journal daily." I taped it to the bathroom mirror where I'd be sure to see it. Back in the living room, I unpacked my supplies and organized them carefully, focusing on the simple task to calm my racing thoughts. Outside, the afternoon light was fading. I found myself staring at the forest edge, wondering what might come out when it got dark. That night, I slept with my rifle closer to the bed than before. I spent the next 3 days writing down everything I did at the Blackwell property. My small notebook became my way to keep track of reality as I wrote down all my activities from sunrise to sunset. Each morning, I'd write the date at the top of a new page, then log what I did hour by hour, where I went, what I found, and what I thought about it all. Every morning, I'd check the property, looking at doors and windows for break-ins, searching the perimeter for those huge, weird tracks, and making sure the generator and water systems were working right. I took pictures with my digital camera and downloaded them to the computer each evening to prove what I'd been doing. In the afternoons, I'd explore the property boundaries more, always keeping the house in sight and making sure to get back before dark. I was super alert, but I still felt worried all the time. I checked my phone many times each day to confirm the date, wondering if more time would suddenly disappear. I couldn't stop thinking about those strange meetings in Koram. People who said they knew me, a life I supposedly lived but couldn't remember. The question kept coming back. Had I really lost those days? Or was something worse happening? On the 4th day after my trip to town, I decided I needed answers. The property manual, my email records, and what I'd seen myself weren't enough. I needed to know why the townspeople recognized me, why Emma had looked so scared when I said I didn't know her. I left early, while morning mist still hung around the trees as I drove down the curvy road toward Koram. My truck took the curve smoothly, though I kept feeling like I'd driven this route hundreds of times before. The town looked exactly like it did during my last visit. Just a few buildings along the main street, a small community mostly serving travelers and locals from the surrounding wilderness. I parked right in front of Sullivan's general store, preparing myself for whatever weird conversation might happen. The bell rang as I pushed open the door. Emma stood behind the counter, going through invoices. When she looked up and saw me, her hands stopped moving. Unlike last time, she didn't greet me cheerfully or act like she knew me. Instead, she watched me carefully as I walked up. "Good morning," I said, attempting a casual tone. I was hoping we could talk. Emma looked around the store. We were alone except for an old man checking out canned goods in the back aisle. "What about?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "You know who I am," I said, keeping my voice low. "Last time I was here, you called me by name before I introduced myself. You said I'd been coming here for years." Emma's fingers tightened around the pen she was holding. "People make mistakes. It wasn't just you. Half the town seems to know me." I leaned in closer. "I need to understand what's happening up at the Blackwell property. I think you know something." Emma's eyes darted to a calendar hanging on the wall behind her. I followed her gaze. October 21st. The calendar had little handwritten notes on various dates. I noticed a small moon symbol she had drawn on the 24th, 3 days from now. "Is that the full moon?" I asked. Emma looked genuinely afraid now. She lowered her voice to just above a whisper. "You need to leave before the moon," she said. "It's not too late this time." "This time? What does that mean?" Emma shook her head, looking toward the back of the store where the elderly customer was still browsing. "I shouldn't be talking to you about this." "Please," I said. "I think I'm losing time." I arrived at the property on October 5th. Then suddenly it was the 17th. I have no memory of those days in between. Something changed in Emma's expression. Pity, maybe, or giving up. The property does things to people. Changes them. Changes them how? Emma's hands were shaking now. She picked up a box from beneath the counter and began needlessly rearranging its contents. "I can't help you. I'm sorry." "Emma, no." Her voice was firm now, though still quiet. "Whatever is happening up there, I can't get involved. None of us can. You need to leave, Tom. Pack your things and drive away. Don't stop until you're across the state line." I tried looking through the property records on the computer there. There's nothing unusual, just maintenance logs and inventory lists. "You won't find answers in William's files." Emma's gaze drifted to the window toward the mountains visible in the distance. "Try the library, small building at the end of Pine Street. Marjorie keeps the local archives." Before I could press further, the bell above the door jingled again. A young couple walked in, cutting off our tense conversation. Emma sat up straight and put on her work smile. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said loudly, clearly ending our conversation. I nodded, understanding the dismissal. On my way out, I paused at a rack of local newspapers. The Hungry Horse News, dated 2 days ago, featured a small story about unusual wildlife activity in the national forest. Reports of elk and deer moving in abnormal patterns away from their typical feeding grounds. A Forest Service spokesperson attributed it to early winter weather patterns. Something about the article bothered me. I remembered the deer I'd seen running away from the forest edge my first night at the property. The Coram Public Library turned out to be a single-room building with a faded green exterior. Inside, bookshelves lined the walls and 3 computer terminals sat on tables in the center. A gray-haired woman with thick glasses looked up from a desk near the entrance. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for local history information," I said, specifically about the Blackwell property near Hungry Horse. If she recognized me like the others had, she didn't show it. Instead, she nodded and pointed to a door at the back of the room. "Local archives are through there, newspapers going back to 1897, county records, that sort of thing. Sign the guest book before you go in, please." I scrawled my name in the leather-bound book she pushed toward me. Only 3 other names had been entered in the past month. The archive room smelled of old paper and dust. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, while bound volumes of newspapers filled shelves on another. A microfiche reader sat on a desk in the corner, looking like it belonged in a museum rather than a functional library. I started with the newspaper archives, pulling bound volumes from the years William had mentioned in the property records. The first reference I found to the Blackwell property came from a 1903 edition of the Hungry Horse News. A small article mentioned the completion of a hunting lodge for Chicago businessman Harold Blackwell, William's great-grandfather according to the property manual. I continued searching, moving forward chronologically. In a 1910 edition, I found something that made my blood run cold. A small notice, tucked between advertisements for patent medicines and a farmer's market announcement. "Caretaker missing. Local authorities have abandoned the search for John Morrison, caretaker of the Blackwell hunting property, missing since October 26th. Morrison, 32, was last seen in Coram on October 20th purchasing supplies. Harold Blackwell has announced that his nephew, Samuel Porter, will assume caretaking duties." I quickly looked for more references, finding a similar pattern that kept showing up over and over. 1917. Samuel Porter, longtime caretaker of the Blackwell estate, reported missing after failing to show up for monthly supplies. New caretaker James Wilson has taken residence. 1924. James Wilson, caretaker of Blackwell property, thought to be dead after 7-year disappearance. Thomas Brooks, appointed new caretaker. The pattern kept going about every 7 years, with different wording but always the same ending. A caretaker goes missing. A new one takes their place. What got to me most was the timing. Almost all disappearances happened in late October. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos of the articles. When I got to the 1980s, I noticed something even creepier. The newspapers sometimes had photos of the new caretakers. They didn't look exactly alike, but there was a clear similarity. All men with similar builds, dark hair and light eyes. Men who, with the right clothes and haircut, could almost pass for me. The newest article I could find was from 2016, saying that Thomas Mitchell has taken over caretaking at the historic Blackwell property after William Blackwell left for his Chicago headquarters. My hands shook as I stared at the grainy newspaper photo. The man called Thomas Mitchell looked exactly like me. I sat back in the chair, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. According to these records, I had been the caretaker since 2016, 7 years ago. But that couldn't be right. I had been working as a wilderness guide in Wyoming. I had records, clients who knew me, a sister who would definitely notice if I'd been living in Montana for 7 years. Unless... I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through my contacts. I found Beth's number and called it, even though I knew there was no cell service at the property. To my surprise, the call connected, ringing 3 times before going to voicemail. "Beth, it's Tom. I need you to call me as soon as you get this. It's important. I need to know exactly when we last saw each other in person." I hesitated, then added, "And if you have any recent photos of us together, can you text them to me? It's really important." I hung up, not expecting an answer with the spotty phone service, but I had to try. I grabbed my notes and photos and thanked the librarian on my way out. She barely looked up from her computer. Back in my truck, I sat for a bit, sorting out my thoughts. The records showed people disappearing every 7 years, always around the October full moon. I kept hearing Emma's words, "You need to leave before the moon." I had to get as much info as I could about the property before the full moon in 3 days. If something strange was really happening, I needed proof, not just to convince others, but to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. The drive back took longer than it should have. Twice I ended up taking wrong turns and had to double back, even though the route was simple. It was late afternoon by the time I pulled up to the house. I used the rest of the daylight to walk the property line with my camera, taking pictures of everything. About a half-mile from the house, I noticed something weird. Markings carved into a huge pine tree. The symbol looked like some kind of animal with antlers and long limbs. The carving was old and worn down, but clearly put there on purpose. As I kept walking the boundary, I found more trees with the same kinds of markings, all facing toward the house. I took pictures of each one and marked where they were on my property map. The symbols made a rough circle around the whole property. The sun was setting by the time I got back to the house. I quickly uploaded the photos to my computer and wrote an email to William with several pictures of the tree carvings attached. "Mr. Blackwell, I've discovered unusual markings on trees throughout the property boundaries. These appear to be deliberately carved symbols forming a circle around the house. I've also noticed unexplained time discrepancies since my arrival, and found references in local archives suggesting a pattern of caretaker disappearances every 7 years. Please advise immediately. Thomas Mitchell." I hit send, though I didn't expect an answer. None of my earlier messages had gotten responses, just short notes saying, "Got it," to my weekly reports. After a quick dinner, I put up motion-sensing wildlife cameras around the house. I'd brought them to take pictures of animals during my stay, but now they'd help me catch whatever was making those huge tracks. That night, I checked all the locks in the house before going to bed. Even though I was tired, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, listening to the house and the woods. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a soft scratching sound from the wall near my window. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and quietly looked out without getting too close to the glass. The scratching kept going, moving slowly around the side of the house. I followed the sound from window to window, but couldn't see anything in the dark. The scratching suddenly stopped. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. Then I heard something else. Footsteps on the gravel driveway, way too heavy for a person. I went to the front room with the lights off and carefully went to the window. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see the driveway lit up by the motion-sensing light. Nothing was moving on the gravel, but at the edge of the light, I saw something going into the darkness, a tall, super skinny shape disappearing into the trees. I waited almost an hour before I felt brave enough to check outside. With my rifle and a bright flashlight, I stepped onto the front porch and swept the light across the yard. The gravel showed clear footprints, the same huge ones I'd seen on my first day, but newer. They went all around the house before heading back to the forest. What really freaked me out were the marks on the siding. Long, deep scratches in the wood, way too high for any normal animal to make on 4 legs. Whatever did this had to be at least 8 feet tall. I went back inside and pushed furniture against the doors. I spent the rest of the night in the living room with my rifle, watching the windows and listening for anything coming back. The cameras would catch anything that came near the house again, but that didn't make me feel any better as I waited for sunrise. When morning finally came, I checked the cameras. 3 had recorded something during the night. The first showed just an empty yard, probably triggered by wind. The second caught a deer running fast across the property, clearly running from something. The third made my heart stop. The picture was fuzzy and partly blocked by leaves, but I could still make it out. Something standing at the edge of the forest. It looked like a person, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms and legs that seemed way too long. The head was the worst part, with what looked like antlers or branches coming out of it. Its eyes glowed white in the dark from the camera's flash. I downloaded the pictures right away and added them to my growing file of evidence. I wrote another email to William, more urgent than the last. Something is stalking the property. I've captured images on security cameras and found fresh tracks and claw marks on the house. The local timetable suggests the situation will escalate with the full moon in 3 days. I need immediate instructions or I will be forced to abandon the property for my own safety. The email showed as sent, but like the others, no response came. I was on my own, dealing with something I couldn't understand, with only 3 days until whatever cycle Emma had warned me about would finish. The full moon looked huge and bright over the mountains, lighting up the whole property in cold, pale light. It had been 3 days since what I found out in town. 3 days I spent getting ready and feeling more worried. The date on my phone said October 24th. The date Emma had marked on her calendar. The full moon. I'd spent those days making the house safer as best I could. I nailed plywood over the weakest windows, checked my rifle and ammo over and over, and set up more motion sensors around the property. Each night something had walked around the house, leaving those same massive tracks, but never coming as close as it did that first night. Today had been different. Since dawn, I'd heard weird movements in the forest, breaking branches, rustling bushes, and once, a sound like wood being torn apart. The wildlife cameras caught nothing except more deer running away and a coyote sprinting from the northern section of the property. As it got dark, I knew I couldn't just wait inside. Whatever was out there seemed to be getting braver, and I needed to know what I was dealing with. I grabbed my hunting rifle, a bright flashlight, and packed a backpack with extra ammo, water, and emergency supplies before stepping outside into the moonlight. The night air hit me like ice water, way colder than normal for October in Montana. My breath made thick clouds that hung in the air before fading. There were no normal night sounds at all. No owls, no small animals moving in the bushes. The quiet felt strange. I walked along the tree line, going slowly, moving my flashlight back and forth across the ground. Fresh tracks showed up about 100 yards from the house. The same long footprints I'd seen before, but deeper, like whatever made them was heavier now. The tracks went north, away from the house. I followed them, keeping my finger near the trigger of my rifle. The trail went through thicker forest, sometimes doubling back or going around trees. It looked like how a predator moves when hunting. 2 miles from the house, I saw the forest opening up ahead. Through gaps in the trees, I could see moonlight bouncing off something in a clearing. I got more careful, crouching low and using the trees to hide behind. The clearing showed up suddenly, a perfect circle about 50 feet across with no trees in it. The pines around it leaned away from the open space instead of toward it, which looked really strange. In the center was what looked like an altar, a rectangular stone slab about 4 feet high, weathered and really old. Even from the edge of the clearing, I could see dark stains across its surface. The stains looked old, but in the moonlight, they seemed almost wet. Strange symbols had been carved into the ground around the altar, forming concentric circles. They matched the symbols I'd found on the trees marking the property boundary. I turned off my flashlight and let my eyes adjust to the moonlight. Something about this place made me want to be quiet and careful. The air felt different here, heavy and stale as if nothing had moved it for years. A twig snapped in the forest behind me. I spun around, raising my rifle, looking hard into the darkness between the trees. My eyes struggled to spot shapes in the shadows. Something moved to my left, a tall, dark figure ducking behind a tree. I turned quickly, trying to follow it. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. A low, rattling sound answered, like bones clicking together. I backed toward the edge of the clearing, pulling my flashlight from my pocket with one hand while keeping the rifle raised with the other. Whatever was out there seemed to be circling me, staying just beyond where I could see. The movement stopped. The forest went completely silent. I turned on my flashlight, moving its beam across the tree line. The light caught it mid-step, coming out from between two huge pines. What I saw wasn't possible. The creature was at least 8 feet tall. Its body looked like a human form stretched way too long. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands with fingers twice as long as they should be, with curved black claws at the ends. The skin looked like old, cracked gray bark, pulled tight over bones. But its head, its head was a deer skull, white in the moonlight, with antlers all twisted and weird, branching out like crooked fingers reaching up. Where the eyes should have been empty, small dots of dull red light burned, staring right at me. It stood completely still, only its chest moving up and down slowly. Then its jaw opened, much wider than any deer should, and from that impossible mouth came the same scream I'd heard my first night on the property. The sound made me freeze with fear. My training kicked in. I fired twice, the shots breaking the night silence. Both bullets hit the middle of its chest where the heart should be. The creature didn't even flinch. It just tilted its skull head, like it was confused by what I did. I fired again, aiming for the head this time. The bullet hit the skull, breaking off a piece of bone near the eye socket. The creature pulled back, not in pain but in anger. It charged. I ran. Branches hit my face as I crashed through the forest, heading back toward the house. I could hear it behind me, not running but moving with long, weird steps, breaking through the woods easily. It didn't sound tired or rushed, just following me without stopping. I looked back and saw it catching up, moving in a strange way that still let it move fast. The house came into view, its windows bright from the lights I'd left on. I sprinted across the open yard, trying to grab my keys. The creature stopped at the tree line. I got to the porch, shoved the key into the lock, and threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I turned the lock, then dragged a heavy bookcase in front of the door just to be safe. Through the window, I could see it standing at the edge of the forest, skull head pointing up at the moon. It let out another cry, a sound halfway between a human scream and an animal's dying wail. Then it stepped forward into the yard. I ran from window to window, making sure everything was locked. The plywood I'd nailed up now seemed like a joke compared to how strong that thing was. A scratching sound came from the east side of the house, claws on wood siding. I grabbed my rifle again and moved to the kitchen, staying away from the windows. The scratching continued, moving along the wall until it reached the kitchen window. The curtain was closed, but through the fabric I could see the shadow of that antlered head, looking in, searching. The curtain moved slightly as the creature pressed against the glass. The window made a creaking sound from the pressure. It wouldn't hold. I backed away, moving toward the basement door. If any part of the house was safe, it would be the thick concrete walls underground. Glass broke in the living room. It had found a way in. I heard heavy footsteps on the wooden floor, then the sound of furniture being knocked over. I threw open the basement door and went down the stairs, closing and locking it behind me. The basement was finished but didn't have much furniture. A storage area, laundry room, and what looked like a home office space. No windows, only one door. I dragged a heavy metal filing cabinet in front of the door, then added a workbench and whatever else I could find. The creature walked through the house above me, breaking things. Wood cracking, glass shattering, heavy objects being thrown across rooms. I backed into the corner farthest from the door, rifle raised, eyes locked on the barrier I'd made. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. I was covered in sweat even though it was cold. The footsteps stopped right above me. The floorboards creaked as the creature seemed to stand in one place like it was listening or sensing something. Then the basement door handle turned. Once. Twice. The door shook as something heavy slammed against it. I raised the rifle, aiming at the door, though I knew bullets didn't do much to the thing. Again, the door shook from being hit. The filing cabinet slid back an inch, but stayed in place. Another hit, and one of the door hinges bent a little. Then, surprisingly, the attack stopped. I heard the creature moving away, its footsteps getting quieter across the floor above. For hours, I listened to it moving through the house. It seemed to be searching carefully, room by room, opening closets, moving furniture. Sometimes it would come back to the basement door, push or scratch it, then leave again. What was it looking for? Around 3 a.m., according to my watch, I heard it in what must have been William's office. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood was followed by a different noise, papers being shuffled, drawers opened and closed. The creature wasn't just destroying. It was searching for something specific. Another hour passed with similar sounds, destruction followed by what seemed like careful examination. Finally, around 4 a.m., the house went quiet. I tried hard to hear any movement above. Nothing. Had it left? I couldn't make myself go check. The barrier I'd built against the door looked sad now in the beam of my flashlight. If that thing decided to come through, nothing would stop it. I stayed in my corner, rifle across my knees, listening to the silence and waiting for dawn. Light came in around the edges of the basement door. Dawn had come. I sat still in the corner, rifle still in my hands, listening for any sound from above. The house had been quiet for almost 2 hours, but I wasn't taking chances. My muscles hurt from staying in the same position all night, and my mouth was dry from thirst and fear. Another 15 minutes passed before I got the courage to go to the barricade I'd built. I moved the filing cabinet and workbench inch by inch, cringing at every scrape against the concrete floor. At the door, I pressed my ear against the wood and held my breath, listening. Nothing. I turned the knob slowly and pushed the door open just enough to look through. The hallway was empty, with pale morning light coming through the broken windows. Taking a deep breath, I raised my rifle and stepped out. The damage was everywhere. The beautiful house I'd liked just weeks ago was totally trashed. Furniture was thrown around in broken piles. The leather sectional was ripped apart, with stuffing all over the floor. Every window was broken, letting in the cold morning air. Deep cuts ran through the walls, going through drywall to the wooden supports inside. In the kitchen, cabinets hung from broken hinges. Dishes and glasses were smashed across the tile floor. The refrigerator door had been torn completely off, its contents thrown around and partly eaten, raw meat packages ripped open, butter containers smashed. I moved carefully toward the front door, looking around for any sign of that impossible creature. Outside, the yard looked empty. The forest was quiet in the morning light. No birds sang, no squirrels made noise. The silence felt wrong. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever that thing was, it would come back. The bullets hadn't stopped it, hadn't even slowed it down. My only chance was to get as far away as possible. I packed quickly, grabbing only essentials, clothes, food that wasn't wrecked, my weapons and ammunition, first aid supplies, and the journal where I'd written everything down. I shoved it all into my backpack and duffel bag, then did one last check of the house. In William's office, papers covered the floor. The desk was flipped over, its drawers pulled out and emptied. The computer monitor was smashed against the wall. Whatever the creature had been searching for, I hoped it hadn't found it. I grabbed my bags and hurried to my truck, always looking over my shoulder. The vehicle started on the first try, and I almost cried with relief. I backed down the driveway and onto the access road, then floored the gas pedal. The speedometer went up as I raced away from the property, heading toward Whitefish, the nearest real town with police, hotels, and people who might help. The further I drove, the easier I could breathe. My hands slowly stopped shaking. I was getting away. I was going to be safe. I drove for 30 minutes, following the main road that should have taken me to Columbia Falls and then to Whitefish. The road curved through thick forest before opening into a clearing. I froze in panic. Ahead was the Blackwell house. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in the gravel driveway. This wasn't possible. I'd been driving away from the property, following the only road out. I threw the truck into reverse, backed up, and turned around. This time I checked the map on my phone, making sure I was heading west on Highway 2. I drove faster this time, watching the road carefully, noting landmarks. A fallen tree, a weird-looking rock, a small stream going under the road. After 45 minutes, I came to a bend in the road that seemed familiar. My stomach dropped as the trees opened up, showing the Blackwell house again. "No," I whispered, pounding the steering wheel. "No, no, no." I pulled over, trying to make sense of what was happening. My phone's GPS showed me 20 miles west of the property, yet here I was, staring at it again. I needed to be more methodical. I took out a pen and paper, drawing a rough map of the area. This time I'd go east toward Hungry Horse, carefully marking my route. I'd pay attention to every turn, every landmark. The truck rumbled to life again, and I started driving east. I made notes at each mile marker, each turn in the road. I drove for over an hour, the mountains of Glacier National Park rising in the distance. The road curved around a large hill, then went down into a valley. The Blackwell house stood at the end of the road. I felt a rush of panic. I slammed on the accelerator, the truck's engine roaring as I sped past the property. I'd take any road, any direction, north, south, it didn't matter. I just needed to get away. I drove recklessly fast down narrow forest roads, taking random turns, pushing the truck to its limits. The engine made awful noises as I climbed steep hills, tires slipping on loose gravel. I drove until the gas gauge dipped dangerously low, until sweat soaked my shirt and my knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. It didn't matter. Every road, every trail, every path through the wilderness eventually curved back toward the house. On my final desperate attempt, I took a narrow logging road I hadn't tried before, going southwest according to my compass. The truck bounced violently over the uneven terrain, the undercarriage scraping against rocks and fallen branches. Then I heard it, a loud bang followed by the truck jerking sideways. The steering wheel pulled hard to the right and a grinding noise came from beneath the hood. Steam poured out as the temperature gauge shot into the red zone. The truck rolled to a stop about half a mile from the property, visible through the trees ahead. I climbed out, kicked the front tire in frustration, then opened the hood. The damage was obvious, a broken axle and a cracked radiator. The truck wasn't going anywhere. I grabbed my backpack and rifle, abandoning the rest of my supplies. As I started the long walk back to the house, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On a tree to my right, partially hidden by moss, was a carved symbol, the same symbol I'd seen at the stone altar in the clearing. I looked around more carefully. Another symbol marked a large boulder 20 feet away, and another on a tree beyond that. I followed them, moving perpendicular to the path back to the house. The symbols continued, spaced about 30 feet apart. I walked for 10 minutes, finding more symbols carved into trees, rocks, even scratched into patches of bare earth. They formed a line that curved gradually, as if following an invisible circle. I checked my compass. If the pattern continued, it would form a massive ring with the Blackwell house at its center. I suddenly understood what was happening. I wasn't just unable to leave. I was trapped within some kind of boundary. The symbols weren't random markers. They were part of something that kept me contained, like a fence or a cage. I traced the boundary for another mile, confirming my theory. The symbols formed a perfect circle about 2 miles across with the house at its center. I was trapped inside an invisible prison. By the time I returned to the house, the sun was low in the sky and the temperature was dropping rapidly. The house was wrecked inside, but it was my only shelter. I'd have to stay the night and figure out my next move in the morning. I walked through the front door, stepping over broken glass and splintered furniture. If I couldn't leave, my only hope was to understand what was happening. William must have known about this place, about the creature, about the boundary. There had to be information somewhere that would explain everything. I started in the office, sorting through the scattered papers on the floor. Most were routine property documents. Tax records, utility bills, maintenance schedules. Nothing that explained the symbols or the creature. Behind the desk, a painting hung askew on the wall, a landscape showing the property from a distance, the house small against the backdrop of mountains. I straightened it, then noticed a slight bulge in the wallpaper behind it. Pulling the painting away, I found a small wall safe with a digital keypad. I tried the obvious combinations: William's birthday from the property records, the year the house was built, the address. None worked. I searched through the desk drawers, looking for anything that might suggest a code. In the bottom drawer, I found a small black notebook with faded leather binding. The notebook contained handwritten entries dating back decades, all in different handwriting but following the same format. Observations about the property, the surrounding forest, and periodic references to something called the Guardian. The most recent entries were dated 7 years ago, written in a sharp, angular hand. October 23rd, 2016. The boundary weakens. I can feel it pressing in, testing for weakness. The substitute is ready. The transition will occur tomorrow night under the full moon. And then, the final entry, October 24th, 2016. The Guardian approaches. The circle is unbroken. 7 years of peace has been secured. The code is the Day of Awakening. The Day of Awakening. I flipped back through the notebook, looking for references to that phrase. Nothing specific, but several entries mentioned awakening in conjunction with October 24th, the date of the full moon, the date I'd encountered the creature. I returned to the safe and tried 1024, October 24th. The safe beeped in rejection. I tried variations, 2410, 2410, 2016, none worked. Then I remembered the pattern in the newspaper articles I'd found in the library. The caretakers changed every 7 years, always in October. 7 years before 2016 would be 2009. 7 years before that, 2002. I tried each date in succession, working backward. At 1897, the year the house was built according to the property records, the safe clicked open. Inside lay a single manila envelope with my name written across it in neat handwriting. I took it to the kitchen table, brushed away broken glass, and sat down to read what William Blackwell had left for me. I opened the manila envelope with shaky hands, pulling out several folded pages of thick paper. The handwriting matched the signature on the welcome note, William Blackwell's fancy writing. But instead of answers, the letter had only more questions. Thomas, if you're reading this, you've discovered the safe. This is only the beginning. The truth is hidden where all great families keep their secrets, behind the walls, beneath the floors. The history of this place goes deeper than you know. Find it. That was it. No explanation about the creature, the property boundary, or why I couldn't leave. Just a cryptic hint about family secrets. I crushed the paper in anger, then smoothed it out again, looking at each word. The letter mentioned secrets, behind the walls, beneath the floors. William was pointing me towards something hidden in the house. Even with all the damage from the creature's rampage, I needed to search the whole building room by room. I started upstairs, working my way through each room, checking for loose floorboards, hollow walls, anything unusual. The bedrooms had nothing except more mess: broken mirrors, torn mattresses, smashed furniture. In what must have been William's personal bedroom, I found a desk with several drawers pulled out, but not completely empty. Inside the bottom drawer lay a small key with a fancy handle. I put it in my pocket and kept searching. The main floor living spaces had nothing interesting among all the mess. The kitchen's broken cabinets and smashed appliances had no hidden compartments. The dining room's wrecked china cabinet only had broken dishes. I went back to William's office, the room that seemed most torn apart by the creature. Something important had to be here. I checked every inch, tapping walls for hollow spots, checking floorboards, looking at the ceiling for any panels. The bookshelf against the far wall caught my eye. Unlike the others that had been knocked over, this one was still standing, though its contents were thrown around. I noticed marks on the floor in front of it, like it had been moved a lot. I pushed against the side of the bookcase and it swung outward easily, showing a doorway behind it. The door was heavy oak, with a small keyhole, that looked like it might fit the key I'd found. Taking a deep breath, I put in the key. It turned with a solid click, and the door swung inward without making a sound. Inside was a small room lined with filing cabinets and display cases. This had to be what William wanted me to find. The filing cabinets had property records going back to 1897, deeds, surveys, construction plans, and tax documents. One folder had old newspaper clippings about when it was built, Blackwell Lodge complete, industrialists' hunting retreat ready for winter season. The article talked about how William's great-grandfather, Thaddeus Blackwell, had built the house after buying 500 acres of Montana wilderness. Another cabinet had newer documents, expenses, maintenance records, and folders labeled with years: 1991, 1998, 1998, 2005, 2005, 2012, 2012, 2019. Each had detailed reports from previous caretakers, their handwriting matching the entries in the black notebook I'd found earlier. What freaked me out most were the photographs inside each folder. Each showed a man who looked a lot like me. Same build, similar features, even similar clothing styles. They were all listed as property caretakers, each working exactly 7 years before being replaced. One cabinet drawer had blueprints for the house, including changes made in 1923 that weren't in the original plans. According to these plans, the basement I'd hidden in wasn't the lowest level. A second basement existed, with a hidden entrance in the study. I left the hidden room and found what must have been the study, a smaller room off the main living area with built-in bookshelves and a desk. Unlike the rest of the house, this room barely had any damage from the creature's attack. It looked almost untouched. Following the modified blueprints, I checked the far wall where floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stood. The plans showed a hidden switch in the third shelf from the right. I pressed various books until one clicked and stayed pushed in. The entire section of shelving slid to the side, showing a narrow doorway with stairs going down into darkness. My flashlight beam cut through the dark as I made my way down the steep, narrow steps. The air got colder with each step, with a strange, clean smell mixed with something earthy. The stairs ended at another heavy door, this one with a modern electronic keypad. I tried the code that had opened the safe, 1897. The light turned green, and the lock clicked with a hiss of air. The door swung open by itself, showing a room that looked nothing like the rest of the house. The walls of the large rectangular room were smooth concrete, not like the rustic wood upstairs. Strange symbols covered every surface, the same symbols I'd seen carved into trees around the property line. They made complex patterns that seemed to move in my flashlight beam, though I knew that had to be my eyes playing tricks. In the center of the room was a glass case about 7 feet long and 3 feet wide, sitting on a metal platform. Tubes and wires connected it to machines along the walls, equipment that looked medical, with screens showing vital signs and data I didn't understand. I walked slowly toward it, my flashlight pointed at the case. As I got closer, I stopped breathing. Inside the case, lying like he was asleep, was me. Not someone who looked like me. Not a similar face or body. It was an exact copy. Same face. Same hair, same small scar on my chin from when I fell as a kid. He even had the same small mole on his neck that I'd had since birth. I backed away, bumping into a table behind me. A wooden box fell to the floor, spilling out my driver's license, my passport, credit cards with my name, and photos I had no memory of taking. Me at the Grand Canyon. Me at a wedding with people I didn't know. Me shaking hands with William Blackwell in front of the house. Next to where the box had been was another envelope. This one sealed with red wax, stamped with the Blackwell family crest. With shaking hands, I broke the seal and took out several handwritten pages. Thomas, by now you've seen what lies beneath the house, your replacement, your continuation. The Blackwell property isn't just land, it's a doorway. My great-grandfather didn't just build a hunting lodge here in 1897. He built a prison. This location sits at a weak point between dimensions, a place where something crossed over centuries ago, something native tribes called the Wendigo. The creature cannot be killed, only contained. The original boundary my great-grandfather created weakens every 7 years during the October full moon. Maintaining it requires a sacrifice, a caretaker whose essence feeds the boundary while they slowly transform. The house chooses its caretakers. It calls to those who resemble the previous ones, drawing them in with promises that match their desires. For you, it was financial security. For me, 7 years ago, it was isolation after a scandal threatened my company. We are all part of a chain, Thomas. Each caretaker eventually becomes the guardian, the creature you saw. When the transformation is complete, the replacement you see before you will awaken with all your memories, your identity, everything that makes you who you are. He will leave this place believing he is you, carrying on your life outside while you remain as the guardian of the boundary. I'm sorry, there's no escape. I tried everything during my 7 years, destroying the symbols, burning the house, even attempting to kill myself. Nothing worked. The boundary pulls you back. The house rebuilds itself. Wounds heal overnight. The transformation has already begun with your first night on the property. Destroying the replacement won't help you. It will only ensure that when you become the guardian, no one will take your place in the outside world. Your sister, your friends, they will only know that you disappeared. Accept what's coming, Thomas. I did, in the end. 7 years of service for an eternity of hunting in these woods isn't such a bad bargain when you consider the alternative. The thing inside you loose upon the world without the boundary to contain it. The choice, as it was for me, is yours. William. I read the letter 3 times, and each time made the horror more real. The double in the glass case wasn't just a copy, it was my replacement. When the change was done, this thing would walk out with my face, my memories, my life, while I turned into the creature I'd seen in the woods. William's words hit me hard. He had been the caretaker before me. He had turned into the creature, the Wendigo. And now, it was my turn. I looked back at my sleeping double. Its chest went up and down steadily, with tubes feeding whatever kept it in this half-alive state. According to William, it already had everything that made me who I was. My memories, my personality, my identity. It would leave here thinking it was me while I stayed here, turned into something not human. I put my hand on the glass case, feeling how cool it was. My reflection lined up with the double's face, so I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. I got the true horror of the Blackwell property, not just that I'd turn into a monster, but that I'd be replaced so completely that no one would ever know I was gone. I pulled my hand away from the glass case like it burned me. My reflection and the sleeping copy under the glass mixed together. One would take my place in the world, while I was going to become a monster. No, I said out loud, my voice echoing in the concrete chamber. I won't accept this. William's letter crumpled in my fist. He claimed there was no escape, that he had tried everything, but had he tried destroying the replacement? He wrote that it wouldn't help, that it would only ensure no one took my place in the outside world. Maybe that was enough. I studied the glass case more carefully. Tubes ran from the duplicate's arms and neck to machines lining the walls. Monitors displayed heartbeat, brain activity, and other readings I didn't understand. The whole setup looked like something from a science fiction movie, not the rustic mountain property I'd signed up to manage. The machines themselves were connected to the concrete walls through conduits that disappeared into small holes. Following these connections led me to a central unit against the far wall, bigger than the others, buzzing with power. A control panel on its front displayed symbols matching those carved into the trees outside. This had to be part of the system maintaining the boundary, keeping me trapped here while preparing my replacement. I examined the tubes running into the case, trying to understand how they worked. Each connected to a different machine, carrying fluids or electrical signals to the duplicate. Near the head of the case, I found what looked like an emergency release, a red lever behind a thin glass panel. Whether it was for safety or maintenance, it might be my way to interrupt this horrible process. I smashed the glass with the butt of my flashlight and pulled the lever. A hissing sound filled the room as pressure equalized. Lights on the surrounding machines flashed from green to yellow to red. Warning messages appeared on screens, but I ignored them. The top of the glass case slowly lifted, releasing a cloud of cold vapor. I backed away, suddenly uncertain. What would happen if the duplicate woke up? Would it have my memories already? My thoughts? As the vapor cleared, the duplicate's eyes snapped open, my eyes staring up at the ceiling. I felt goosebumps as he sat up robotically, tubes still connected to his body. His movements were stiff and jerky. He turned his head toward me, but his look seemed unfocused. Those eyes, my eyes, looked empty. Nothing like the consciousness William had promised would be there. This thing wasn't me yet. It was just a shell waiting to be filled. A crash sounded from upstairs, followed by heavy footsteps. The Wendigo had returned to the property. I needed to act fast. Next to the control panel, I spotted a small utility room. Inside, I found tools, spare parts, and several containers of chemicals. One was labeled kerosene, heating backup. It was nearly full. Grabbing the container, I returned to the main chamber. The duplicate had disconnected some of the tubes from its arms and was trying to stand. Upstairs, furniture scraped across the floor as the creature moved through the house. I unscrewed the cap from the kerosene container and began pouring it over the machines, starting with the central unit. The sharp smell filled the air as the liquid splashed across control panels and soaked into bundles of wires. I continued around the room, dousing every piece of equipment. The duplicate watched me with growing awareness, head tilting in a way I recognized from my own habits. It opened its mouth as if to speak, but only managed a hollow rasp. "Sorry," I told it, feeling strangely guilty, "but neither of us belongs here." I saved the last of the kerosene for the glass case and the duplicate itself, pouring it directly over the bedding where it sat. The liquid soaked into the material and dripped onto the floor. Footsteps moved overhead, closer to the study where the hidden entrance lay. I had minutes, maybe seconds. From my pocket, I pulled out a book of matches I'd taken from the kitchen drawer days ago. With shaking hands, I struck one and held it up. "This ends now," I said, dropping the match onto the nearest puddle of kerosene. The fire caught right away, running across the floor and jumping onto the machinery. I backed toward the stairs as fire spread all over the room. The duplicate just sat there, not trying to escape, as flames moved up the side of the glass case. The fire alarm went off upstairs, followed by the sound of sprinklers turning on. But the hidden basement didn't have any safety systems like that. The flames got bigger, burning through the equipment that had kept this horror show going for over 100 years. When the duplicate caught fire, a weird scream cut through the air. Not from the basement, but from outside. The sound got higher and higher until it seemed like nothing should be able to make a noise like that. I ran up the stairs, through the study, and into the main house. Water sprayed from the ceiling, already putting out the smaller fires from the Wendigo's earlier rampage. Through the broken front windows, I saw it. The creature, William, thrashing on the lawn. Its stretched out limbs bent in ways they shouldn't as it twisted in pain. The connection between the boundary magic, the duplicate, and the Wendigo was real. Destroying one affected the others. I grabbed my backpack from where I'd left it by the front door, making sure my journal and the most important evidence were inside. The basement fire would spread eventually, even with the sprinklers. I needed to get away while the creature couldn't move. Outside, I stayed far away from the twitching Wendigo, running toward my truck. The truck was still where I'd left it earlier, clearly damaged with its cracked radiator and broken axle. It shouldn't have been drivable. Yet, when I turned the key, the engine started up loud and strong. I didn't question this strange bit of luck. I threw the truck into reverse, backed up, then sped down the gravel driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw smoke pouring from the house windows and the Wendigo still twisting on the lawn. The property boundary had made every road lead back to the house, no matter which direction I took. I tested it now, driving west on the main access road. The forest flew by on both sides, trees turning into a blur of green and brown. 10 minutes passed. 15. The house didn't reappear. I'd broken through. I smiled, but it quickly went away as a sharp pain shot through my right hand. I looked down and froze. My skin had turned gray and hard, like bark. Cracks showed up across my knuckles, slowly spreading up toward my wrist. I tried to move my fingers and felt another jolt of pain as the hardened skin resisted the movement. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The property boundary was broken, but the change had already started. William's letter didn't say which happened first, becoming the guardian or getting replaced. Maybe both things began at the same time. I'd killed the duplicate, but maybe I was too late. The scary thought hit me. I might have stopped my replacement from taking my life, but I couldn't stop myself from turning into the monster. My left hand hurt again, then the pain moved up both arms. My skin kept getting harder and cracking. The change William warned me about was taking over my whole body. I pushed down harder on the gas, making the truck's engine roar as I sped away from the Blackwell property. But I knew I couldn't escape what was happening to me. I gripped the steering wheel harder as another wave of pain shot through my arms. The truck hurtled down the winding mountain road away from the Blackwell property, engine whining as I pushed it well beyond any safe speed. My eyes darted between the road ahead and my hands, watching in horror as the gray, bark-like texture spread past my wrists and up my forearms. "It's happening too fast," I gasped. I tried flexing my fingers, but they wouldn't work right anymore. Instead, they stretched, growing longer with each jolt of pain. My nails got thicker and curved, turning a deep brown black as they grew into sharp points. One of these new claws poked through the rubber of the steering wheel, going in as easy as cutting through butter. The road blurred as tears filled my eyes, not from emotion, but from my face changing shape. I could feel my skin stretching tight across my cheekbones, pulling toward my hairline. My jaw hurt with a deep, grinding pain as the bones started changing shape. I reached for the rearview mirror with my half-changed hand, turning it to see my face. What looked back at me didn't look human anymore. My skin had the same gray-brown texture as my hands, pulled so tight that you could see the shape of my skull underneath. My eyes had changed too, the whites now yellowish, the irises growing until almost no white remained. Destroying the duplicate wasn't enough, I said through teeth that felt too large for my mouth. I broke the boundary, but not the curse. A horrible realization hit me. William's letter had been right. There was no escape. But he'd been wrong about one thing. Destroying my replacement hadn't trapped me on the property. It had set me free to go beyond it. I was becoming the Wendigo, but without the boundary to keep me in. My back jerked hard, making the truck swerve across the center line. I pulled the wheel back, trying to keep control as my spine stretched, my bones popping and grinding as they got longer. I couldn't go back to town like this. I couldn't let whatever I was becoming hurt innocent people. Even with the pain, I remembered something. Devil's Ridge, a steep cliff overlooking the valley about 5 miles from the Blackwell property. I'd seen it marked on the property maps with a warning note about the dangerous drop. That could be my way out, my last human act before I lost myself completely. I turned the truck onto a smaller road that went through thick forest toward the ridge. Just moving sent fresh pain shooting through my changing body. My knees now pushed awkwardly against the steering column as my legs grew longer. the bones cracking and reshaping with each minute that passed. As I drove, weird images flashed through my mind, memories that weren't mine. A man in 1940s clothes running through the Blackwell house, holding his changing hands to his chest. Another in the 1960s, looking at himself in a bathroom mirror as his face started to change. A woman in the 1970s, her fingers getting longer as she tried to dial a rotary phone. Each memory came with feelings, fear, anger, denial, acceptance. They're all real, I whispered through lips that barely worked. All of them. Every caretaker. The memories continued flooding in, merging with my own. I saw William as he once was, a younger man signing the same contract I had signed. I felt his growing horror as he realized what was happening to him, his desperate attempts to escape, and finally his acceptance as he became the guardian of the boundary. The road steepened as I approached Devil's Ridge. Through the trees ahead, I caught glimpses of open sky where the cliff dropped away. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor with a foot that barely fit in my shoe anymore. More memories burst into my consciousness. Hundreds of years of guardians, each beginning as a caretaker lured by promises that matched their desires. The property cycling through periods of abandonment and occupation, always finding someone new, always continuing the very old ritual started by Thaddeus Blackwell, and older memories too, from before there was a house, before there were boundaries, the original Wendigo's hunger, its endless wandering, the indigenous people who first trapped it on this spot of land. Thaddeus Blackwell hadn't created the prison. He'd merely modified one that already existed, using the creature's power for his own purposes. The trees opened up to reveal the cliff edge ahead, a sheer drop of several hundred feet to jagged rocks below. I aimed the truck straight for it, my misshapen foot heavy on the accelerator. "This ends now," I said through a mouth full of teeth too sharp and numerous to be human. The truck shot forward toward the edge. In the seconds before impact, I felt strangely calm. This was my final choice as Thomas Mitchell, to stop whatever I was becoming from hurting others. The front tires left the ground and the truck hung in the air for what felt like too long. Then gravity kicked in and the vehicle started to fall. I closed my eyes, waiting for the crash that would end everything. It never came. Instead, I felt like something pulled, no, threw me from the vehicle. My body smashed through the driver's side window like it was shot out by something I couldn't see. While the truck kept falling, I was somehow tossed in the air before hitting hard against some rocks about 20 feet below the cliff edge. I heard the truck crash at the bottom of the valley. I lay there shocked, thinking I would die from my injuries, but I didn't. Instead, my body kept changing even faster now, bones fixing themselves while they got longer and changed shape. I tried to scream, but the sound that came out was that same weird cry I'd heard from the woods my first night at the Blackwell property. My jaw stretched forward as more teeth kept growing in. My skull changing shape felt like it was ripping me apart. I watched in horror as my arms finished changing, growing almost twice as long, ending with hands that had long fingers and black claws at the tips. My clothes ripped as my body grew taller, skinnier, and my skin got hard like old wood. In my last moments of thinking like a human, I struggled to stand on legs that bent all wrong now. Rising up, now at least 8 feet tall, I understood how awful the Blackwell curse really was. There was no escape by dying, no way out from the hunger building inside me, a hunger that would never go away. William Blackwell's letter made sense now. We are all part of a chain. The property didn't just make Wendigos, it was a prison for one thing, moving from person to person. I hadn't broken the curse by burning the copy, I had just changed how it worked. Without someone ready to take my place, I was stuck being the creature, free to go beyond the property now. The hunger got stronger, pushing out my last human thoughts. I turned my head, now more like an animal skull than a human face, toward the lights of Koram. Even from miles away, I could smell them. People. Food. In my last moment as Thomas Mitchell, I tried to turn away, to go deep into the wilderness where I might never see another person. But the hunger was too strong, the change too complete. The creature that had once been Thomas Mitchell started running through the forest on all fours, moving incredibly fast toward the smell of humans, toward Coram.